Welcome to this session, which has been called Evidence-Based Affordable Co-Housing, with Chuck and Diane, who may or may not be here a little later, and Hiedi, actually Hiedi is not, and Jane Nichols of the Cohousing Research Network. CRN aspires to be a global resource center for co-housing research. CRN was formed in 2011 at the National Co-Housing Conference in Washington, DC. Researchers from all over the world gathered together and decided that co-housing research should be as collaborative as co-housing itself. I'm Neil. I'm part of the Swans Market co-housing community in Oakland, California. I'm also on the Co-Housing Research Network team, and I welcome all of you to this session, and I will turn it over to Chuck and to Jane.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's good to see you all here. We have actually, there tends to be slides that peripherate way out of boundaries for this situation. So we probably have a lot of slides, but our real goals for this this session are, and what I should do is bring up the model.
I think, Chuck, are you going to share your screen? Because right now we're not seeing it.
Yeah, I was going to share it, and it's covering up the button that that I hit share with, right? So what I'll do is just get out of this and come back. There we go. Okay.
I have it on my screen, Chuck. Do you want me
Can you
to
get it?
share it?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Here we go.
Oh,
Everybody see it?
yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
All
So,
right.
we started out by talking about CRN, and we actually have, I think this is the time to talk about what we're trying to do, because it's a full session. And, the third slide talks about the goals and what we hope to do. And so could you grab those, Jane?
So these are the members of our research network: Heidi Berrggren, Chuck McLean, Diane Margolis, Jane Nichols, Angela Sanguetti, and Neil Planchon. So a few of us are here today and some of us are not.
So also LaDonna Niggi is another new member besides Jane. And the next slide, talks about the slide after that, talks about what we hope to accomplish, really to have sort of a airplane view of various proposals for co-housing and affordability in co-housing and the various models. And we look at that particularly as a standard model, the one that you know about, that several years in preparation, several more years in making things come to fulfillment. And also in ways of approaching the building of that community that afford less cost. But we really wanted, after we kind of do this zip over land, to engage participants in talking about the various models and what they see ahead, given the circumstances that we are in our society. So the next, Jane, did you have anything else? It's like,
No, we can keep
okay,
going.
great. Because I think our time really is valuable here. This is kind of and these, by the way, are from 2 studies of the 7 surveys that we've that Cohousing Research Network has participated in, and some that they've actually done or overseen. This one is from a community survey in 2017 of 46 communities. And so the figures are all from that. And we'll talk about another results of another survey a bit later. This slide, if you see the higher, more than 30% of the communities in this sample were priced higher than the market, and so and only 7% were below market. So it kind of indicates that co-housing is not the place to go to if you're looking, aside from special units that are marketed for affordability. It's not the place to go to find a more reasonable house. So go ahead, Jane. So according to this survey, the 59% of the communities who had affordable housing, they were 59% of the total. The other communities that did not respond presumably didn't have affordable housing. So there's a little bit of a feeling that what happened here may not be any exemplary of the total, given that also one of these communities had 20 affordable units in it, which kind of skews what's going on, but maybe not giving you a real idea of how affordability is working in these standard communities as they were. Okay, Jane. And where do these come from? And this survey found that of the 31 communities that had affordable out of the total, that 8 of them had churches, NGOs, non-government sources. The privately subsidized, and there were many where the residents ponied up to support and finance these affordable units. But the publicly subsidized ones were, very much the over the others in terms of what went on. And this is kind of something, part of what we'll pick up on later, in the necessity for public subsidization of these units. Okay. Okay, this should not be there. Could you get to the next one? So in general, the people who were brought into affordable housing were people who were welcomed into the community. These communities themselves, 59% of them had whole unit rentals, and they would hire qualified members from within the community, which means in many cases the affordable units, to do the work for the community. And they had home-based businesses, which helped with affordability. And 76% of them said they spent less on household utilities. So these are the collateral, the positive collateral effects of co-housing. Okay. And that's another one that's not there.
Is Diane here or no?
No. And she wasn't able to make it. So I'll give it over to you.
Okay, this is from a study that Angela did that's published in the Journal of Architectural Planning and Research. And these are just highlights of that study. And essentially, co-housing is still just a niche market. It's typically white, it's typically high educated, middle to upper class, and liberal individuals. I think most of us already know that. And what she found is that retrofit co-housing is a bit more accessible than traditional co-housing. So for for folks that are young or minority racial groups, or for renters and singles, anybody that's really not as financially well off, the retrofit co-housing seemed to be an option that allowed them to actually move into co-housing. And retrofit co-housing typically means that there's a neighborhood that's already existing, or there's some buildings that are already existing, and they retrofit that to a co-housing community. So it's not the, dream it, talk about it, fund it, build it model. It's a little bit different. The movement itself is still facing these ideological challenges because people still kind of take co-housing with the communes from the 1960s and 70s. And what she also found is even the term itself of co-housing can be a barrier because of that connotation. And so it's just not really being mainstreamed yet. And then finally, another obstacle is just lack of suitable land for building affordable co-housing. So most people that really would benefit the most from affordable co-housing would prefer to be in a city where there's easier transportation options and things like that. But that's, of course, where the land is the most expensive. And so the co-housing communities tend to be more on the ex-urban or suburban fringes, because that's where we can really afford to buy the land to do it. This is a map showing where the new build housing is and the retrofit co-housing. And you can see that the retrofit co-housing really enables people at a lower income to actually get into that housing market. So that's a huge benefit of retrofit co-housing, but it's got similar obstacles, but somewhat different than traditional co-housing. But it is something that we don't talk a lot about, and we definitely need to do some more research on. Chuck, I'm going to give this one back to you. It's income by co-housing type, kind of separates the retrofit from the traditional.
Yes, I can only say that that it's another way of showing what the map showed, and that is that for the retrofit, there were many more people in the 35,000 to 49,999 range, and I think it particularly shows up with the long green column on the left there, and so it's pretty dramatic that in the case of retrofit, really people who had lower incomes were able to move into those. They found them attractive and lived in them at a higher level than those of the higher income. So it's kind of an attractive kind of affordability thing from that point of view.
Right. Some other models for building affordable co-housing, and these are just some ideas that that we've done a little bit of research on. One of them is called the flex nest model, and so that is where you can convert single family to multifamily homes in existing neighborhoods. And so there's a lot of neighborhoods, particularly when the market's not as strong as it is now, that are standing vacant, and the single family model doesn't really work for a lot of families. And so the flex nest actually converting that to sometimes 2 families, sometimes 3 family, and it could even be different generations within the same family. And we'll show you some examples of that. Another model is modular or prefab. And so the traditional co-housing model is that really every home ends up being a custom home. And if we think that we can do that affordably, I think we're dreaming a little bit. Where factory built, actually there's a savings in that, just economies of scale. But where the cost savings really come in is if the finishing is done by the resident itself. So if you buy the unit and you buy the really basic unit and you have it delivered and installed, then all of the interior finishing could be done by the resident or the residential community. And so if you're working together to do that, that sweat equity really helps you to form those neighborly bonds. So rather than the model of we're planning it together, we're working with the architect together, we're all sort of making those trade-offs together of what we're willing to live with. This is actually the hands-on. It's the barn building model, and maybe even like a Habitat for Humanity model. So that's how they can afford to keep those houses lower cost. Another option is tiny homes and house kits. And that's really just a matter of reducing the square footage. So the square footage is going to save costs in both the assembly and the materials costs, but also long-term in the maintenance and the energy use. And then finally, there's container homes. So container homes are the big shipping containers. And they're very inexpensive to buy. They're a lot more expensive to finish out. But what's great about the container homes also is the modularity. And so you can hit those different cost points for people based on whether you're doing 1 unit or 2 units or 3 units, or if you're even building it into sort of a mid-rise structure. So some visuals for that, these are some examples of converting a large single family home into multifamily homes. And so typically it's going to be creating demising walls that separate it. It's a fire separation wall. It's also a strong acoustical barrier. And this isn't going to work for every type of home, but you know, with an architect or designer to help you, it can actually be done without that much difficulty. Extra costs would be you may need to install another air conditioning unit or things like that, but this would be considerably less expensive than building new. And we're happy to share these slides with anybody that's interested when we're done with our presentation. Modular housing, you can see the cost per square foot here. The base, the custom is not super custom, it's just small upgrades. And then the delivered price per square foot, you can see is much less than a typical home. There's a big difference between that and the finished price. So delivered would include your site prep, your foundation, and maybe a porch or a deck. But all that interior finishing can occur within the community. This is something that, you know, everybody in the community would have to buy into. So we call that kind of the secret sauce version 2, because it's building sweat equity and going through that community building in a different way. House kits or tiny homes, there's a lot of different companies making these right now. Some are very expensive and very luxury and exclusive, but others are not. And so if the land ends up being somewhat affordable and people are willing to make sacrifices in size or in standardization, then some of these types of house versions can also be an option. And then a shipping container home. The container itself, as you can see there, is fairly inexpensive for a 40-foot container. The slide on the right there shows some examples of some floor plans. And then there's some pricing for how to finish that out. So it would help to have some members in your community that know how to do drywall and know how to do insulation and things like that. So Chuck, can I give it back to you?
Okay then, thanks.
All right.
Now for something different, really. The housing around the world and in the U.S., it's much more noticeable, is in crisis. And I think was stovepiped a bit or locked off from the wider effects of this. 2018 study by the Harvard University for Housing Studies found that households that are cost burdened, that pay more than 30% of their income in housing, are like nothing we've ever seen, was a quote of one researcher. The lack of affordable housing is primary to this. Homeowners forced out by the 2008 crisis, the recession, have become high-end renters. Therefore, they force the rents up and cause the number of cost-burdened renters to rise by 2.8 million. Further, there are public health threats from the lack of affordable housing. There's an error on here under the percentages, but it's 20% of public health can be based on genetics, 20% rather than 60% on healthcare. But the 60% comes in social, environmental, and behavioral factors. And this is a lot to do with what's around you, and it's most of what causes our health to go up or down. This is something that affordability in co-housing can address to a certain extent, and we're going to look at that a little bit more. Jane, I wonder if I can do this for a second. So what's the case for new models? And we saw how much the public sectors and the NGOs, the business sectors, give to affordable housing. Given the current crisis, I would think that there will be, if we have a government that's sensitive to the needs of low-income groups, that the U.S. public sector is going to be pushed to invest a lot more resources. And with the difficulty of accessing attractive urban land in America, the business sector may also find itself investing. And I was particularly drawn into this subject in the area last fall when a friend of mine who was on a task force that was advising Arlington County government on how to address the Amazon landing in Arlington County, where I live. And what I found was I had talked to this person quite a bit about affordable housing and the benefits, but I didn't have a model that addressed how a lot of money put down for a lot of affordable housing, how for rather on regular co-housing, how much that would mesh with the policies that we have. And so I became interested and looked into it a little bit more. And I particularly looked at some data from residents and from another study that we did. So, Jane, this is from a 2012 study of 502 co-housing residents. And what I realized looking back over this was that what is rewarding to people who live in co-housing, what contributes to their satisfaction in life, are a combination of factors or facets. We had 9 facets that we looked at closely, 9 aspects of co-housing that we've used in several surveys to address various issues about co-housing. And the ones in red that we put here are ones that we believe have to do with people. It's just a content thing. These are facets that have to do with people working with each other, engaging with each other, socializing, and various aspects. And what we did was we did an analysis, and the outcome was that the 3 on the right, the 3 red ones that came from that list, account for all the ability to predict satisfaction with life in co-housing. And what that means is that the other, when you put these 3 in, the other 6 had no further effect. In other words, what matters are social issues in co-housing: opportunities to share, opportunities to help, opportunities to have social relationships. And to me, what that meant was, well, affordability in co-housing has to do with a special circumstance that's important to everybody. It's important for their health, It's important for the life that they live in terms of getting income and dealing with the world around them. And so I thought, maybe how can we do that? How can we put affordability into the process? So that the next slide addresses some of that. Jane, could you do the next?
Yeah, I think this is your slide, Chuck.
Yep. And so what I propose based on that that set of circumstances and that result from the survey, among the others too, looking at how affordable housing, how much of it is in the standard model and the co-housing communities that we know, how many are really able to reach the circumstances, how many of us could say to Amazon, we want millions of dollars to build co-housing, and it'll take 6 years or whatever. And so I kind of came to another model, and that is that, and this is a real thing, because in December, Amazon said that it would give $20 million to build affordable housing of whatever kind, without, I think, any particular upfront interest in which kind it would be. And this, for that kind of circumstance, I suggest some ways that it could come together for affordable housing. The affordable housing professionals that we know, all the names of people who develop them now, could get together and design a process whereby they would build a pre-build, a house that is a co-housing community in planning that could be built at the same time as all the other buildings that are being done for affordable housing through these kinds of payments. And they expect, they get the money and they expect it all to come together at one time. So the plans here would have to be for some kind of not taking the 3 to 6 years to plan, but something that professionals agree would be a model for affordable housing. At the same time, there'll have to be processes for recruiting from a pool of eligible applicants. There'd be people who, in income level and in other kinds of aspects of their application, they would be eligible to come in. And then it would be a question of which of these applicants would most likely fit with the co-housing approach. Then when the money comes in, the affordable co-housing stakeholders could go in and make a proposal, and they'd be ready to build at the same time as the others. This is a bit, I don't know, I don't think that there's a model for this anyway, but we know about co-housing, and we know about the kind of housing that is often available. We hear about the Chicago projects. We hear about that, all those buildings that reject the kind of human needs that are so fundamental to health and welfare. Jane, please. So our question then is, or our questions for you is, what do you think, now that we've gone through this overview, if you will? What do you think about what could be done? What are the challenges that are presented in trying to do something that is more that is able to move to more people than is done at present? What other models could there be? I think these are the ones that we would like to look at, and we would like to ask you about them. And I think that's where we go from here.
Chuck and Jane, this is Neil. There's a couple of questions in the chat, one of which was answered by Heidi. I didn't catch them in real time, but I'm wondering whether we can address those questions before we go into an open discussion.
From Barry.
Sounds okay. Mary, did your question get answered in a satisfactory way? Please unmute yourselves. There's Mary, there's someone called CMC, and also Teresa. Let's just take turns putting our questions to the team.
Yeah, so what I was wondering is whether there were some examples of possible solutions being given. And I was wondering if those were based on actual communities and examples and studies that had been done about those communities, or are these theorizing about, okay, these are the problems we've identified and we think these are possible solutions?
I think as far as the ones that Jane talked about, there's definitely cost associated with it. Isn't that right, Jane?
Yes, those are estimates. To my knowledge, none of them have been created in a co-housing community yet, but I do believe there are a couple of co-housing communities that are launching or maybe built in Oregon that are using the tiny house model.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a model that has been implemented. The modular housing, that's going to be a little bit more challenging because you do have a lot of restrictions in different cities and jurisdictions about where you can place a container home. And so that would pretty much have to be a community that's being built from scratch, and they're going to have to go through some pretty considerable permitting processes. And the flex nest model is something that is being tried, but it's being tried on a one-of basis, one at a time. And it's being implemented more by families who share ownership of the building. The obstacle to that is really zoning restrictions, because if it's zoned for single-family dwellings and then suddenly you make it a multifamily dwelling, then you might incur the wrath of the city. And so I think a lot of times what we're really facing is the zoning restrictions that are going to limit a lot of this more innovative approach. And even some co-housing communities still face that in a traditional co-housing community, but less so, I think. So the models that I showed with the visuals, a little bit more theoretical, except for a few of them. The study of the retrofit co-housing, those are existing and those are successful communities. And I haven't got information specifically to each of those communities, but that is a model that has been working.
You know, and the kind of at the end, the model I was talking about, which is building, having a standard form for a community, was probably multi level, but I'm assuming that it would be much less expensive because it isn't going through the processes that the standard community development has now. You know, it would be a set of maybe 5 standard plans, and they would be ready to go. And so, and the other part of it would be that people would be there would be a filtering process that would fit those people who were in that category, in that neighborhood or in that jurisdiction, who would apply, and then from them there'd be a fitting process where they would go together with the housing that's being built. So the whole thing is in terms of time and in terms of how people are onboarded would be dramatically different from what we see now.
Great, thank you. CMC, sorry, I don't know your full name. Did Heidi answer your question satisfactorily?
I guess so. This is Christine Clements.
Christine.
And my question on that research data was the difference between trying to build less expensively upfront and attract members to buy in and start a community versus established communities that may have an urge to have to build their equity and have the value of their property increase along with all other market rate housing. So that was the gist of my question for that research analysis. And the answer seemed to be that it was probably a mix because the individual communities provided an answer and didn't necessarily distinguish. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Great.
I think so.
Thank you. Teresa, you're up. There's a couple of questions in the chat from you. Do you want to just speak them out?
Thank you. First of all, in Southwest Detroit, we have a population of Islamic, Black, and Latino peoples that are really in need of affordable housing. And I'm part of the Michigan Eco Village group, and we are networking with a group called Bridging Communities there. And our goal right now is to see if we can come together and build an eco village within that community in an urban setting. So we have to keep the cost low, and we're still in the finding out, collecting information, but they have a grand view of building a greenway connecting plots of land, because there's some that have been cleared, land that's been cleared, and others where buildings are kind of dilapidated but still standing in Detroit. And so part of their need is assisted living. So we kind of have an idea of having an assisted living unit, but caregiver home, people that are, you know, their families are in assisted, a family member would be in assisted living, but they would live in an apartment close by that would be in this eco village like concept. So I'm wondering, just as a data point, if there is prefab construction, you know, plans for apartment type dwellings. Another piece of this is that within the Michigan Eco Village, one of our board members operates a certified nursing assistant school.
Huh.
And he has received a big grant for apprenticeship skills training. So one of the goals he has, once this can get implemented, is to do prefab construction and like have a factory where apprentices would learn how to build, do home building, and would build these units. So if we could get the plans or something like that, it would serve in multiple ways. So that's the question.
Okay. Let's give them a chance to reply. And then I'd like to get a few more folks in the question chat before we move into the discussion portion. We've got 20 minutes left, so I want to just be mindful of time as well.
Okay, Jade,
I can respond a little bit to that. There is
has a question, by the way.
Okay.
Yes, Betsy.
So let me just respond.
Yeah, exactly.
Other question. There is, Bill Thomas has created a nonprofit organization where they're building something called the Minka Home. It's M-I-N-K-A. It is a single family. It's not multifamily, but I think it could fairly easily be converted to that. And it's all accessible. And so it's really ideally for elderly. And so that's one model that you can look at. But honestly, the plans are the easy part. You can buy a set of plans for almost any sort of housing that you want. it's the cost of construction and it's the cost of land that's really the obstacle. So having that apprenticeship program sounds amazing. And I think prefab and modular housing that is factory built is going to be one of the options that becomes more attractive. But we have to then convince people that they're not going to get their dream home. This is not going to be customizable. I've toured many co-housing communities that, they thought that they were doing something that was going to be very affordable. And then every single resident says, well, but I want that wall moved over there. And I want that closet to be something else. And I need all these customization factors that suddenly skewed the price on everything. And you think, well, it's just one little thing, but the way construction works is that one little thing gets multiplied 10 times because everybody has to get their little profit off of it. But look into that Minka home model. I think that might be something valuable for you to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, let me see, just quickly catching up here. Tamika, you're on my radar, and coming up next, the person who is from Rocky Corner in Connecticut, G. Patan, is that your name? What's your name? You want to go ahead and ask your question? You'll need to unmute yourself first.
Yeah, sorry, I just
Hi.
unmuted. Hi,
Thank you. Hi.
Rosanna is my name. And
Oh.
I'm not from Rocky Corner, but I'm aware of Rocky Corner.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, yes.
Okay, I'm in Maine, and I'm working on a co-housing, affordable housing, net zero housing project here in the Mid-Coast. We're a small group of core organizers, and we're working closely with the town officials in a town on the Mid-Coast. We're early in the process, but the way we're approaching it is sort of the reverse of what David was talking about. We're planning a co-housing community that includes a number of affordable units. And that's basically what Rocky Corner did, as I understand it. And David Berto is the development consultant who worked with Rocky Corner, and will be working with David as well on this project. But the approach is a partnership with the town officials. We've been talking with the town planner because there's going to have to be a zoning ordinance change. And they're very in favor of that. We've been talking with the select board chair and the town manager. And the way it's looking right now is that we'll be a team together addressing the need, the really crisis in affordable housing up and down the coastline of Maine, and doing that within the context of a co-housing structure. And right now, there's a lot of enthusiasm for it, so I'm optimistic. We're waiting for an official decision, so I can't really say a lot, but I think it's going to be a positive decision.
Yeah.
That sounds fantastic all over. Would you be willing to share a little bit in the chat about the project? I see there's other people on the call here who might be interested in just knowing about it. Thank
Sure.
you.
Okay.
Tamika, thanks for your patience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my question, I put it in the chat, but I'll go ahead and I'll repeat it for the group who hasn't read it. So I just keep hearing us use community, and I want to make sure that as a beginner that I understand which way are we looking at community. Are we talking about like pop-up units? So like say I had a unit and I'm like, okay, I want to convert that into a co-housing space, or are we talking about actually doing like subdivisions of co-housing units? Because I've been a homeowner, I'm not currently, but I've been a homeowner and they had HOAs, right? Well, in HOAs, they don't favor renters because of all the restrictions and things like that, which renters wouldn't know because that turnover is so high.
Yeah, thanks for surfacing that issue. Chuck, Jane?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for a legal definition of community for purposes of building or changing buildings, that goes to the to the jurisdiction that you're in. But often I was talking about community, I know, as a group of people who are committed to each other and have certain relationship in terms of maintaining and upholding the buildings and the area that they live in. And so it's legal, but it's usually a condo arrangement. But it's the glue is the commitments they've made to each other to live there. That would be.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah.
You're muted, co-housing.
Thank you. I was just proposing that we use the last 15 minutes or so of our time together to have these questions for discussion that you proposed to us, Chuck and Jane.
Okay. Shall we go ahead with that? The first one was, how much can these approaches contribute to encouraging affordability on a national level? What are the challenges that each of these presents? What could be done to make them more effective as models that move co-housing forward? And what other models are available? I think we've heard of a lot of nuances, and I got to say that that it has to do with the population that you're trying to make co-housing available for, and the one that I was alluding to at the end had to do with large groups of people who were being perhaps have even more difficult housing situations for them, so that they're in a position to receive affordable benefits, and that's they are in there and actually make application to be part of a larger group. And what co-housing, I was just saying, needs to do under that circumstances is to have pre-built designs that they can move in and make available, rather than the time frame that's generally thought about.
Are we chiming in randomly here, Neil, or?
Yes, by all means, yes. How does
Okay.
that? Yes, please, let's do that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, pre-designing something that works for co-housing, I think that's something a number of us have been talking about over the years. But then you have to make sure to have the community coalescing. So whether that's, I think having workshops in interpersonal skills, nonviolent communication, all of those things amongst future members, maybe leaving part of the project for people to design, maybe the common house, even if it's an apartment situation and you've got an area already, blocked out for the common house, but just some kind of participation to bring people together. But I do think there's potential there for creating something that's, maybe a little bit of a different model of co-housing and that can bring people in quickly, because there's definitely people who don't have the stamina or ability to be part of a several years long process. But you got to make sure the community piece is gels, and that you provide you provide a setting for that to happen.
Yeah, for sure.
I think I've been involved in 4 different co-housing community launches, 4 failures. And the failure is generally fairly early on, when people start having to put $10,000 down to something that's still so nebulous. I think if there are some concrete things, even a set of plans or that piece of land, or some kind of backer behind them, I think that's a big piece of it. But that writing that check for $10,000 when you're still just talking about a dream, that is really prohibitive to most of us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Betsy, I see your hand. Jump on in.
Thank you. I wanted to speak to a couple things. One of the 3 communities in the survey that Chuck mentioned that have more than 20 affordable, below market rate units was Los Angeles Eco Village. And so as we think about other models, I think we grow co-housing in part because other intentional communities feel like they have something in common with what has otherwise been a real estate development model of community. Like you have to build something new. And in fact, the glue holding people together is part of the strength of co-housing. So I wanted to just mention, though, I was surprised that Los Angeles Eco Village was part of that that survey, Chuck. And so I want to suggest that you look that up. It's a cooperative, it's an ownership structure of cooperatives. It's 40 apartment units of people, people living in 40 different apartment units on a community land trust with a garden space and edible gardens and communal they have meals, I think, once or twice a week in their common house within the apartment building that 2 apartment buildings they own. So I wanted to mention that as an alternative model and just also speak up for, we don't use this term, but mobile home park cooperatives are pretty strong. Some of them are very strong.
That's interesting.
And New Hampshire has ROC USA, Resident Owned Communities USA. It helps mobile home parks become resident owned and managed. And they've actually given money to a group out of Austin, Texas to go advocate and try to preserve mobile home parks. But we really, because it's not moving in the direction where finance capital and large scale real estate sector interests are able to make a living, mobile home parks are not being developed new. And in fact, they're often restricted, but go for it, especially in Texas, where there's practically no zoning. I just want to encourage that there are other models, but they're kind of all one-offs, except for this possibility of thinking about, can you buy land and create a mobile home park? Because the small size and the density. The second thing, I'm sorry to move on, but Tamika, I just wanted to give you a little hope. That yes, there's another group in LA that I would refer you to if you're still on. It's called the Latchkey Collective, and they are a group of kick-ass women who are teaching people how to understand and build tiny homes, which currently are not legal. Anything under 300 square feet that's not on a foundation is generally prohibited for year-round living in California. It is a gray area even in Texas, where there's now a 500 unit tiny home village called Communities First, just outside Austin. So, but in LA, this Latchkey Collective is hot on the heels of getting tiny homes added to the city's accessory dwelling unit ordinance, so that essentially portable RVs can be legally rented. And there's lots of little fantasies in many places of tiny home villages. But Dignity Village, which was mentioned in the previous session breakout room that I was, is an example. And these are coming out of the homeless communities that are creating their own communities of mutual care, these tiny home villages. But I would Latchkey Collective and LA Eco Village are 2 great alternative models to consider. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom, Betsy.
Thank you.
So we're at 5 minutes before the end. I guess either some closing thoughts, or if you have a burning question or a burning comment, if you haven't spoken yet, please, this is your moment.
There's a great quote. This is just really quick. Is housing a traded commodity which is valued for its financial status, or is it a human right valued for its use? That was in this Danish study that I was reading. It's like, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, we're in a revolutionary moment.
Well, and I think that's education is so important. I live in Texas, and yes, there are people who are in mobile homes, but here in Texas, that's really considered not so cool. So trying to get seniors to do that in a co-housing thing is difficult. And also modular housing. A lot of the land that we have looked at won't permit modular housing.
Oh.
It's already been zoned out. It's been, can't do it. So I think education is a big piece of it, because I've learned a ton, and I've only been at this 3 or 4 months. And I've changed a lot of my attitudes, but I think if we can't change the attitudes of the people that would be using these houses, then, you know, we're going to have a problem.
Here, here.
Yeah.
So this is Christine, to the point. Sorry, this is Christine.
Please go ahead.
Quickly on the point of education and sort of putting the word out. I think there's a place for big marketing effort. Everyone that you know knows what you mean when you say tiny house, because they've seen all the TV shows on, you know, and YouTube channels. And there are still so many people who have no idea what the co-housing model looks like. So I think some kind of push for one of the people who's doing a session this afternoon didn't really know that much about co-housing before he came to this event. And he suggested, why aren't there Hollywood movies like The Big Chill that talk about groups of people who start a co-housing community? So if there are any Hollywood producers out there.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. You never know where they are. That's great. Yeah, that's a good hot tip right there.
There were a couple of reality TV shows. Husband Swap, I think, was one with a community in Boulder.
That's right.
Oh, boy.
Figures.
Anybody else who wants to jump in the last
There's
couple of
also
minutes?
a TED Talk by the woman from Pleasant Hill, no, Temescal Creek, right?
I really appreciate it, but sorry.
But good point.
I really appreciated Betsy's response. I think Jane's question was about, you know, getting folks to write the check and getting that buy-in. And so I guess I'm curious, Betsy, or if anyone has any experience on developer-led co-housing, where kind of a core group of people act as really the developers. They're still members of the community. I don't want outside investment necessarily, but it's kind of that idea that a few people are acting as the developer, and they're probably more in a position to actually own that property and pioneer the co-housing before they begin really inviting people to join the community.
I have an example of a developer-led co-housing, but it was the development team. Are you interested in that and hearing about that? Sorry?
I would love to hear more if we have the time.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, several years ago, I approached a developer and asked if he would do co-housing as part of his development, and he said, yes, if you can find a group. So we publicized the land, the location, the concept of co-housing, and asked, you know, did some presentations and you know, publicity, and found people who were interested. And then I brought them together in a, you know, values workshop, visioning workshop, and we found that there actually was a group. That's the short story. So that is a model. It has its upsides and downsides, but I could tell you more about that if you care to contact me.
Wonderful, thank you.
May I comment, Neil?
So we need to close this up. We'll see you there. Thank you very, very much all for joining us, and please reach out to the Co-Housing Research Network online, and please continue to network together for the rest of the day. There's